As a result of this demand for space, the CBD will have to push its buildings up vertically, and compared to other parts of the city, the CBD will also have used below and above ground levels. Public services that are typically located in CBDs include City Hall, courts, county and state agencies, and libraries. And these facilities are typically clustered in the downtown area of a city. The business services in CBDs are advertising, banking, finance, journalism, and law. And law particularly depends on the proximity to professional colleagues. And for business services, offices typically cluster in a CBD for accessibility purposes. The consumer services in CBDs have three types of retail services that are clustered because they require accessibility to everyone within the region. The three retail services are retailers with a high threshold, those with a high range, and those that served people who worked in the CBD. A food desert is an area in a developed country where healthy food is difficult to obtain. The lack of manufacturing and residence in a CBD are a direct result of high rents and land shortages. Manufacturing is a result of land shortages because today our facilities require large parcels of land in order to spread their operations among one-story buildings. This land is usually available in the suburbs, while our inner-city neighborhoods are highly clustered and don't have enough room for these manufacturing sites. The lack of residence is a result of high rents. Many people used to live in or near the CBD, and in the 20th century, most people abandoned the downtown area because of a combination of push and pull factors. They were pulled into the suburbs specifically because they offered larger homes with private yards and modern schools.
Issue 2. Where are people distributed within an urban area? Sociologists, economists, and geographers have developed 3 models to help explain where people live within an urban area. The first method was called the concentric zone model. It was created in 1923 by sociologist E.W. Burgess. Using concentric zone model, say families with the same income and ethnic background, one family lives in a newer house and another family lives in an older house. The family that lives in the newer house is much more likely to live in an outer ring and than the family in the older house. According to this method, there is 5 rings. Ring 1 is the Central Business District, or CBD. This is the most inner ring, which consists of non-residential activities. Ring 2 is a zone in transition, which is mainly industry and poor quality housing. Ring 3 is the zone of working class homes, which is pretty self-explanatory. Ring 4 is the zone of better residences, which contain newer houses for the middle class. Ring 5 is the outermost ring, which is a commuter zone. Some people who work in the CBD choose to live in small villages that have become dormitory towns for commuters. The next model is the sector model, which was developed in 1939 by land economists. Certain areas of the city are more attractive for various activities, originally because of an environmental factor or even by mere chance. Basically, as the city grows, activities expand outward in the wedge or sector from the center. Multiple nuclei theory was developed by geographers C.D. Harris and E.I. Ullman in 1945. According to this model, a city is a complex structure that includes more than one center around which activities revolve. The multiple nuclei theory states that some activities are attracted to particular nodes, whereas others try to avoid them. For example, airports attract hotels and warehouses. Using the multiple nuclei model, people with the same ethnic or racial background are likely to live near each other. CBDs outside North America contain more consumer services, such as grocery stores. Streets reserved for pedestrians are widespread in North Europe. Although constructing large new buildings is difficult, many shops and offices still wish to be in the center of European cities. Even though the rent's much higher in the center of European cities by comparable size to U.S. cities. American urban areas differ from those elsewhere in the world. For example, in Europe, the parks in the center of European cities often were first laid out as private gardens for aristocratic families, and later were open to the public.
In Latin America, wealthy people live in the inner city, and middle-class people live in the suburbs. In America, wealthy people live in well-defined elite residences. Most middle-class and wealthy people try to stay away from disadvantaged sectors. No. Disadvantaged sectors are places where it's very noisy and there's a lot of pollution. In developing countries, cities have zones of intensive land use and high value land near the center of the long commercial spine. In some countries, because of the house shortage, immigrants live in the squatter settlements. Squatter settlements have poor services because the people can't afford them or the city can't afford them. So that means there's a lack of school, paved roads, telephones, and the sewers. The Aztecs founded Mexico City on the mountain of Chapultepec. They were forced to leave, so they left to where present day is the University of Mexico. The Law of the Indies, it was basically an outline of how a city should be built. In Sao Paulo, high-income sectors extend south from the CBD. When the Europeans gained control over Africa, Asia, and Latin America cities, they expanded the existing cities for colonial services. All Spanish cities in Latin America were built according to the laws of the Indies.
Help me. Save me.
Key issue 3 is why are urban areas expanding? And in this section, we cover suburban expansion, suburban segregation, and urban transportation. In the 1950s, 20% lived in the suburbs compared to 40 in the cities and 40 in small towns. Unlike in the 2000s, where suburban living increased by 30%, having 50% of Americans living in suburban areas. As cities grew, suburban expansion was achieved by adding peripheral land wherein its residents preferred to remain legally independent of the larger city. An example of a way this is achieved is the peripheral model, which is defined as an urban area consisting of an inner city surrounded by large suburban residential and business areas tied together by a belt or ring road. An example of peripheral model would be the freeways surrounding downtown San Diego and Mission Valley. With all their surrounding areas consisting of residential and small business space, another form of urban expansion was achieved due to a process called annexation, wherein governments legally added land area to the city. There are several rules concerning annexation that vary among states, which usually can only be achieved when a majority of the residents in that area vote in favor of annexation. With expansion comes the need for residency, which can be described with the density gradient. The density gradient shows that fewer people live in the center, like downtown, with more people in outside areas like Imperial Beach. With suburban expansion comes the need for local governments. These can be separated into city, county, and incorporated government when you look at San Diego, for example. Local example of this would be San Diego County is not bound to the same rules and restrictions as the city of San Diego. And unincorporated areas like Spring Valley or Lakeside are not founded by the same rules as the other two mentioned. In some cases, suburbans have a brawl wherein cities purchase land for future development. An example of this would be the recently built condos along the estuary. With expansion, suburban areas that have created segregation have two ways: segregation in social classes and segregation by land use. Suburban areas were built for people of a single social class, which excluded people due to the cost, size, and location of housing. Suburban areas consisted of single-family housing with much larger lots, making homes more available to well-off families, forcing lower and middle-income families into multi-family homes closer to the city. Suburban areas also created a division by land use, separating the family home from commercial and manufacturing activities. A local example of this segregated land use can be seen here in Imperial Beach, where businesses are separated from residential by having them in strip malls and shopping centers, effectively showing a separation between residential and commercial areas.
People don't usually travel without a destination. Each trip has its own purpose. More than half of all trips are work-related, and 1/4 of all trips are for shopping or other personal needs. Lots of people live in crowded cities because they have to be within walking distance of stores or workplaces. The invention of the railroad did come in very handy. Motor vehicles became more and more popular over time, as vehicles such as cars and trucks are better for longer or shorter distance and reaching exact destinations. The Global Positioning System, also known as GPS, became very useful in avoiding traffic and finding the easiest way to get to their destination. As mentioned earlier, many people live in the Central Business District for easier access to more workplaces. About 40 trips to and from the CBD occur 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. In the US, public transit is mainly for rush hour and traveling in and out of the CBD. The car of the future. People have been more reluctant to give up motor vehicles because of how useful they have been. Diesel engines burn fuel and is just more efficient. Hybrid sales have increased rapidly. The gasoline engine powers mostly, but the electric motor takes over when the gasoline engine is at its least efficient. For ethanol, the fuel is made by distilling crops. The full electric has no gas engine. For the plug-in hybrid, the battery supplies power at all speeds. The hydrogen fuel cell. Hydrogen combines with oxygen to form an electric charge.
The spatial difference between inner-city residential neighborhoods surrounding the Central Business District and suburban residential neighborhoods on the periphery is that inner-city neighborhoods face physical, social, and economic problems that are rarely faced by those located on the periphery. The process of deterioration starts with the number of low-income residents increasing in a city and the territory that they occupy expands. Neighborhoods can shift from middle-class to low-income occupants within a few years, and as the low-income residents move into a city, middle-class families move out to newer housing located in the suburbs, farther from the center of cities, and sell or rent houses to the lower-income families. Large houses built by wealthy families in the 19th century are subdivided by landlords into smaller dwellings for low-income families. This process is known as filtering. Landlords stop maintaining houses when the rent they collect becomes less than the maintenance cost, which will result in the deterioration of the building, and therefore it's unfit for occupancy. Not even the poorest families will rent the dwelling. Thousands of vacant houses stand in inner areas of United States cities because landlords have abandoned them. Schools and shops have closed in inner city neighborhoods with rapidly declining populations. Through the filtering process, many low-income families have moved to less deteriorated houses farther from the center of cities. Drawing lines on a map to identify areas in which they will refuse to loan money is practiced by some banks and is known as redlining. As a result of redlining, families that are trying to fix up houses in a marked area have difficulty borrowing money from banks. Public housing is housing that is owned by the government. Housing authority established by the local government manages buildings. Federal government pays the cost of construction, maintenance, repair, and management not covered by rent. Gentrification is the process by which a middle-class family moves into a deteriorated inner-city neighborhood to renovate the housing. Gentrification is an alternative to demolishing inner-city houses. Inner-city residents are frequently referred to as a permanent underclass, which is a group in society prevented from participating in the material benefits of a more developed society because of social and economic issues. Underclass are trapped in an unending cycle of economic and social problems. They suffer from high unemployment rates, alcoholism, drug addiction, and more. Their children typically attend deteriorated schools. They struggle to find affordable housing, and underclass neighborhoods lack police, fire protection, hospitals, clinics, and other basic facilities. Underclass are also unable to compete for jobs, and they live in an atmosphere with no way to obtain good habits.